We're live. Hello, everyone. I'm Rania Khalek, and this is a special live episode of Dispatches. We're now a year and a half into the most horrific genocide of our time. A US-backed, Israeli-led live stream campaign of mass slaughter, starvation, ethnic cleansing, and displacement in Gaza. Tens of thousands, possibly even hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have been killed, entire neighborhoods wiped out, and the world watches in silence, or worse, in complicity. And it's getting more depraved by the day. The atrocities aren't just continuing, they're escalating in cruelty and scale. Why? Because the settler state of Israel faces zero consequences. The world has granted it limitless impunity. And as long as there's no accountability, the Israelis will keep pushing the line further and further. This is what happens when a cowardly world not only looks away, but arms, funds, and defends genocide. This is not a war gone wrong. This was always the plan. We're witnessing Zionism's endgame, and the repression that once seemed distant is now coming home, from Gaza to campuses to courtrooms. Joining me to break all this down is someone who's been warning us for years, Ali Abunimah, Executive Director of the Electronic Intifada and author of The Battle for Justice in Palestine. Ali, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah.
So, Ali, there's a lot to get into, but before I get to some of the broader topics I want to talk about, I just wanted to get your general thoughts on, I mentioned in the intro that the depravity continues to escalate because Israel keeps getting away with more and more. And last night, we saw these horrific images of journalists literally burning alive who were sitting in a tent outside of a hospital, which Israel bombed. And this comes after the Israelis summarily executed one by one and then threw into a mass grave 15 Palestinian Red Crescent medics, lied about it, and then were caught in their lie because much of it there was a lot on video. But I'm just curious your general thoughts on those developments.
What can anyone say? The horrors are beyond anything people can imagine. We've seen in the recent days and weeks atrocity after atrocity, massacres, the bombing of schools, children beheaded by bombs, people picking up literally the heads of their children, beheaded babies. It feels like it's getting worse because it's continuing. But if you think back, the crimes that Israel's committed have been as depraved from the very beginning. The torture, the attacks on hospitals, on healthcare, the total disregard for any kind of humanitarian red lines, the systematic murder of journalists, burning people in tents. None of this is new. We've seen Israel doing this for 18 months. It feels worse because it won't stop and no one is trying to stop it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you're right about that because some of these criminal, I mean, how many journalists has Israel killed? Like 200.
More than 200.
More than 200. So I wanted to ask you, this weekend, Ali, I covered for Breakthrough News this protest in Washington, D.C. For Palestine, and it also against these abductions by ICE of students across campuses, including Mahmoud Khalil and several others who had been outspoken on the issue of Palestine, and that's why they were targeted. And there was also a rally taking place in parallel to the Palestine rally, and it was a hands-off rally. And it was literally hands off everything. I mean, hands off our bodies, hands off the Treasury Department, hands off DEI, hands off Department of Education, hands off NATO, which I was like, of all the things to like care about right now that are happening under Trump. But it was literally everything except for Palestine. It was just the most cartoonish example of progressive except for Palestine. I just found it so offensive. I mean, it's always been offensive, this progressive except for Palestine. But as Donald Trump is, intensifying this genocide, continuing this genocide that Biden started, And on top of that, he's, increased the repression here in the United States by using ICE in collaboration with these pro-Israel groups to target international students and literally put them in ICE torture chambers. That's what ICE detention is. I found it unbelievably offensive to talk about everything except for the most important things happening right now.
Yeah, I mean, these were pro-Democrat rallies, these so-called hands-off rallies, which is why Palestine wasn't included. These were rallies that were sort of, if not officially endorsed, at least unofficially endorsed by the Democratic Party establishment, which conducted this genocide with full-throated support for Israel for the first 15 months of it. And it's hard for them to change horses now. Hatred of Palestinians is baked into the Democratic Party hierarchy. So this shouldn't surprise us. But if you think about it, take Palestine, their response to a genocide that Trump stopped briefly, at least stopped in part briefly, and then restarted with full support. That's absent, but the lack of response is far broader than that. If we were to believe their rhetoric about how grave the threat of Donald Trump is, and we are seeing things that are a grave threat to democratic rights, to the rule of law, to freedom of speech, to basic constitutional rights, their response should be much bigger than it is on all those fronts, and they're just absent. They don't care. There is no real opposition in the United States, sadly, at least not from the official opposition party.
Well, I mean, you had Cory Booker filibuster last week, and everybody was like, oh, what a hero. And this is somebody who's taken so much money from AIPAC, went on to vote to give Israel more weapons, and thinks Yoav Gallant is just awesome. Yoav, starvation, talking about Palestinians as human animals, Yoav Gallant, that guy. So, I mean, it really is, the hypocrisy couldn't be more clear when it comes to these people, especially because of the fact that, they called Trump a fascist, claim to oppose him, but then literally don't oppose the genocide that he's now overseeing.
And then of course some of them have very meekly criticized the American Gestapo rounding people up for criticizing Israel. Of course, ostensibly on the grounds of fighting anti-Semitism and support for Hamas. But the Democratic Party helped lay the groundwork for that for years by demonizing the Palestine Solidarity Movement as anti-Semitic, by demonizing supporters of the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement as terrorists in suits, and this type of language that came from the Israel lobby, and that was in many cases parroted by top Democratic leaders. To this day, Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader in the Senate, the former majority leader, put out a tweet a few days after Mahmoud Khalil was arrested. Like, most of the tweet was attacking and demonizing Mahmoud Khalil, and then saying, "Oh, but maybe we shouldn't be arresting people for things they say." This is who they are. They can't do better than this.
No, they can't. And then to take it to the situation in Gaza that is escalating across the West Bank now, and has been, actually, we've talked about this several times. Israel is just doing everything it's always done, but all at once. It's most intense, I think, because of that impunity I mentioned earlier. But I think it's important to understand this isn't like, because Israel's really trying to frame all of this, and its supporters have tried to frame all this as just like a crazy reaction post October 7th, right? But at the end of the day, what we're seeing take place across Gaza was always the plan. I mean, and Ali, you've always been warning about this. Gaza has for a long time been treated like a concentration camp. You know, they put people on a diet, as they would say, to let only a certain amount of food aid go in so that there was enough, only up to a certain amount of calories for all the human beings living in Gaza, dehumanizing them to be even considered less than animals, even as they do with all Palestinians. But ultimately, the goal since Israel's founding, since before Israel's founding, since the Zionist project came into being, has been to remove the indigenous population, whether by exterminating them or ethnically cleansing them. And that's what happened in 1947, 48. It's what happened in 1967. It's what's happened every single day since Israel's founding. And so what we're seeing in Gaza is the culmination of generation after generation of this Israeli society being taught to hate Palestinians and see them as people they need to eliminate, which actually, in order to have a Jewish state in this part of the world, you do need to eliminate the indigenous people. It's actually quite logical in a horrible, evil way. So I'm just curious if you could speak to the fact that this isn't just Netanyahu. This isn't just the Likud party. This isn't just, oh my God, Israelis have gone crazy because of October 7th and terrorist attacks or whatever. This is exactly the logical end goal of Zionism.
Yeah, and I think when you're saying this isn't just Netanyahu, you may be referring to Senator Bernie Sanders, who continues to only criticize Netanyahu and who talks about Netanyahu doing this and Netanyahu doing that and the US selling weapons to Netanyahu as if he's the only person living in Israel and as if this genocide doesn't involve hundreds of thousands of Israelis directly and millions more indirectly, and doesn't enjoy very broad support across Israeli society. So there's this effort to sort of shield Israel by naming Netanyahu as the bogeyman. But the unofficial motto of the Zionist movement is a land without a people for a people without a land. And that's a lie on both sides of that equation. When you talk about this, let's talk about the second part, a people without a land. That's the implication that the Jewish people were this landless, nationless, entity just roaming around the world, which was never true. Jewish people had lands. They were French, they were German, they were Italian, they were British, they were American, they were Moroccan, they were Iraqi. Jews belong to the countries in which they live. So the idea that there are people without a land is an anti-Semitic idea. I know that you've had our friend, Columbia University Professor Joseph Masshad on your program, who's explained this much better than I can with the depth of the history. But this idea that Jews don't belong in Europe and need to be expelled somewhere else was originally a Protestant, Christian, anti-Semitic idea to help Europe get rid of its indigenous Jewish population, and then it was later adopted by Jewish Zionists. So that part is false. But of course, the land without a people part, referring to Palestine, was equally false because the Palestinians were always there. And as Zev Jabotinsky, the founder of the so-called revisionist movement, the stream of Zionism that is still represented by Benjamin Netanyahu and the Likud party today, all the early Zionist leaders, Jabotinsky, Ben-Gurion, even Theodore Herzl, recognized that Palestine had an indigenous people, an indigenous Arab, Muslim, and Christian population, plus a small number of indigenous Jews as well. They were a very small number, but they were there. And that they would have, that this indigenous people would have no reason to just roll over and accept to be invaded and colonized by this European Jewish colonial movement. And we have to remember that the Zionists referred to themselves as colonialists. This isn't a term that we are retroactively applying to them. They talked about themselves as colonizing Palestine in the name of European so-called civilization, and in the name of serving the imperial interests of the West. And the when and I think you've also had Ilan Pape on, and in his recent book, Lobbying for Zionism on Both Sides of the Atlantic, he talks about he goes into detail about how those early Zionist leaders marketed the idea of Zionism to various European empires, and it was very explicitly that we will be your sort of outpost of Europe in this part of the world, in Asia, in this barbaric, savage part of Asia, as they would have put it. And Winston Churchill in the 1920s, when he was a colonial secretary, or I can't remember exactly what role he was in, but Winston Churchill was already a prominent British politician in the 1920s. When he adopted Zionism, and he was an anti-Semite, he like most European leaders at the time, he hated Jews. He thought badly of them. He thought they were a malign influence. And he thought that Jews were primarily responsible for communism. And he saw Zionism as a Jewish anti-communist movement that could be used as a proxy of the British Empire to co-opt Jews into the imperial project. So none of that could be achieved without the expulsion of the Palestinian people. And that has been the goal of Israel from the Zionist movement from the very start, from the 1880s, when the first settlers, the first European Jewish settlers arrived in Palestine. They started expelling Palestinians from their land. And equally important, from that first moment, Palestinians have resisted that expulsion as they continue to do.
Exactly. And, Ali, I want to talk to you a bit about the repression that we're seeing come to the US. And it's not new, but it's definitely increase in intensity, obviously, with this sort of crossover between Donald Trump's and his administration's very anti-immigrant sentiment, as well as the, anti-Palestinian Palestinianism that we've seen from obviously both parties. And, actually a friend of mine who, bless him, he still thinks that he can make little changes inside the Democratic Party. And I mean, I guess keep trying, dude. But a friend of mine who's still kind of working in that sphere said to me that, Joe Biden loaded a gun and gave it to Donald Trump. And that's what we're seeing right now happening across all these college campuses, because the crackdown that took place last year happened under Joe Biden, and also at Democratic liberal universities, where the administrators are mostly Democrats and liberals, where they brought police in to crush and beat up students and literally tear gas them, shoot rubber bullets at them, and get rid of their encampments, demanding divestment from genocide, of their tuition funds from genocide. But all that's to say, I wanted to get your take on just what we've seen happening with this repression coming home. Because as far as I see it, I mean, Israel has a PR problem now after a year and a half of genocide, where, a younger generation has already been moving towards being more pro-Palestine than pro-Israel, something that you've covered at the Electronic Intifada for years now. And this genocide has really just solidified that. And even, I mean, if you look at the Democratic base, when they're polled, they're not majority pro-Israel anymore. That's new. And they're increasingly pro-Palestine. And that's a big change as well. So if you can't move people with PR, with propaganda like you used to, even though the entire media apparatus is still in the bag for Israel, then you have to move to repression. And that's what I see happening right now. But I also see this as something that you've also called very often the canary in the coal mine with Palestine, because this is also an attack on free speech in the US, and an attack on, higher education from the right wing. And they're using Palestine to do it because they know there won't be opposition from institutional power. So anyways, I'm just curious if you can speak to the horrors that we've been witnessing just the last month and a half, beginning with the arrest of green card holder Mahmoud Khalil, who's still in ICE detention, and, leading to the arrest of many more people, including Badar Suri Khan at Georgetown, I think, Rumeysa Ozturk at Tufts, and just on and on and on. And not all of the people, by the way, being arrested and having their student visas revoked are pro-Palestine activists, but many are.
Yeah, it's now been almost exactly a month since Mahmoud Khalil was abducted, and he's still in ICE detention. Of course, that was the start of this ongoing crackdown, literally arresting people. We all saw the horrific video of Rumeysa Ozturk being arrested by what looked like the Gestapo, by these masked plainclothes officers, for the crime of co-signing this very mild op-ed in the campus newspaper, and the US justifying this. And that part of it is, of course, very harmful and significant to those individuals, but its goal is to intimidate everyone into silence and send the message that the United States is really not a safe place for foreign scholars. And who knows when they'll start on citizens, already green card holders whose rights are effectively the same as citizens, or always have been, are now being treated as if they are no more than non-immigrant visa holders. And then at the same time, you have the attack on the institutions themselves, where the Trump administration has suspended funding, federal grants to a number of major universities so far, including, of course, Columbia, Princeton, Brown University, and a number of others that have reported, and they're reportedly reviewing billions of dollars in federal grants to Harvard, all under the guise of fighting anti-Semitism. And what Colombia has done, and Colombia has always been complicit with the government, is preemptively surrendered. Harvard did, by the way, even before this so-called funding review, to adopt this bogus definition of anti-Semitism, which basically equates criticism of Israel with anti-Jewish bigotry, and all these other measures, which effectively turn these universities into servants of the Trump administration and remove any academic independence or freedom of speech. Princeton, to its credit, its president has said publicly that Princeton will not capitulate to these demands, that if their funding is cut, they will find funding elsewhere, or they will reduce their activities, or they will consider reallocating their endowments. I mean, remember, all of these prestigious universities have these massive endowments, often bigger than the economies of small countries. Columbia's endowment is $15 billion. Colombia can afford to go without federal funding if they wanted to take a stand, but they don't. They don't want to take a stand. So they have the ability to withstand this. So imagine this alternative universe where the universities stood together, shoulder to shoulder, and said, if you come for one of us, you come for all of us. We will pool our funding. We will make up any federal grants that are cut for essential services to any one of us. We will pull together our funds and make that up. We will help the smaller universities or the poorer universities who don't have funding, who don't have such big endowments. Imagine if they took that stance. They could also rally the public and rally their alumni in their support, instead of just rallying the few small the small number of pro-Israel billionaires who are calling the shots. But what I want to get to is, what's the big picture here? What's at stake here? Even if you leave aside Palestine, the universities, America's research universities, have been the engine of the American economy in terms of innovation, in terms of medical research, in terms of making, for decades, the United States this magnet for international talent and intellect, and excellence. I mean, they boast about that, and it's largely true in terms of the universities. They have been world-leading universities, but they also rely to a large extent on foreign students and researchers, particularly in the sciences. When you look at the medical schools, the number of fellows in the top specializations are disproportionately from overseas, and this is true in all sorts of scientific fields. And so when you tell the universities you have to be subordinate to what the government wants, and at the same time you send the message that this country is too dangerous, the United States is too dangerous or too unstable or too uncertain for foreign researchers to come to, because if you come and you say one thing wrong or you do one thing wrong, they're going to uproot you, they're going to uproot your family, they're going to destroy your career. What you're doing is destroying one of the few bases of one of the few great things about America. And that's not to idolize these universities, because of course I have lots of criticism of them, but I'm looking at this from the big picture, that actually the universities are one of the things that you would want to protect and enhance and invest in. Of course, you would change them in different ways. But if you destroy the universities, what's left of America? I mean, what's left of American so-called greatness? Not manufacturing, not our crumbling infrastructure, not our public schools at the primary and secondary level. What's left?
That's
They're
a really good
destroying it.
question.
They're destroying it, and the Democrats and the liberal establishment are participating willingly in that destruction.
It really is stunning. And I mean, you see a lot of these trends happening across European countries too. I mean, you were arrested and then deported when you were in Switzerland. And I mean, I still can't believe what you had to go through there in a supposedly civilized country, all of this to shut people up. And to crush dissent and to scare people, not just in the US, but across Europe, but I mean, increasingly in the US as well, in like a ridiculous, almost cartoonish way. And I think this is a good opportunity to tell people, if you haven't already, I really encourage you to go see the movie The Encampments, which I'm very biased towards because it was produced by Breakthrough News in collaboration with Watermelon Pictures and executive produced by Macklemore. Also, Ali Abunimah appears in it. So I didn't make the documentary. I did a couple things to help, like very tangentially. So when I saw it for the first time, Ali, at the media screening, I was like, so happy to see you in it, and I loved what you said. But I don't know if you've had a chance to see it yet.
No, I'm going to see it tomorrow, hopefully. But people have seen it, have told me it's excellent, and not just because I'm in it, although I'm very happy to be in it. But your colleague Kai Pritzker, who worked on it and who came to Chicago and interviewed me for it a few months ago, does a great job. And Ruwaida Amer, who is one of the Electronic Intifada's regular contributors in Gaza, is the Gaza producer. I understand there's a lot of footage from Gaza showing how the universities there have been systematically destroyed at the same time as protests against that have been crushed in the United States. And of course, there was a very, in a way, prescient or foresighted focus on Mahmoud Khalil, who is very visible and outspoken in the film. So it's very timely, and I encourage people to see it. It's showing in Chicago at a small theater, and I believe it's on theater release around the country, albeit in sort of smaller venues, but people should see it and support it if they can.
Yes, please do. The more people who go see it, the longer it stays in theaters. It sets the record straight. It's literally a movie that just shows what actually happened at the Columbia encampment and a couple other encampments like at UCLA. And Mahmoud Khalil is featured prominently in it. And actually, it was supposed to be released in the fall, but we upped the release date because of his arrest. And hopefully, this will help with his case because it shows exactly who he is, which is not how he's being depicted at all. But also, I've seen it 3 times, and every single time I'm just kind of blown away. Makes you laugh, makes you cry, makes you feel empowered, makes you feel all the feelings, makes you feel angry. So yeah, definitely go out and see it. You can go find tickets at the-encampments.com. So I had to do that little promotion there, but it's worth it. But Ali, I wanted to ask you about something that I think is really important to sort of re-examine as we see what's taking place right now with this attack on not just visa holders, visa holders are much more vulnerable, it seems, to having their visas revoked without any due process. But with this attack on green card holders, and you mentioned that ultimately they want to come after American citizens. They do. And so there's a couple precedents that have been set, including under Democratic administrations. And, someone who came to mind when thinking about the fact that they may come for Americans next is Rania Khalek, who the Electronic Intifada covered. I'm just curious if you could kind of give everybody a brief overview of what happened with Rania Khalek, because I think it's important and seeing something that the Trump administration might actually look back to. This happened under the Obama administration, by the way. But we could see the Trump administration looking back to this particular case as a precedent in going forward against American citizens at some point.
Right. And this is something I've thought about and spoken to people about, spoken to lawyers and things to get their opinions on and see what if they think this could happen. And this is going after naturalized US citizens. And a naturalized citizen is someone who was not born a United States citizen, but acquired citizenship later in life. And Rania Khalek is a Palestinian who was living in the United States for several decades. She worked in Chicago with the Arab American Action Network community organization. And she had been a political prisoner in Israel until, I think, 1979. She spent a decade from 1969 to 1979 in an Israeli prison. She had been accused of taking part in a supermarket bombing, I think, in 1968 or 1969, following the Israeli occupation of the West Bank. She was tried in Israeli military court. She was tortured. And so under normal circumstances, we don't give any credence to such a conviction. She lived in the United States, first as a permanent resident, then as a citizen for decades, I think starting in the early 90s, if I recall correctly. And then in the mid 2000s, around 2010, 2011, around then, US federal prosecutors came after her and charged her with immigration fraud, basically, saying that she had obtained her US citizenship fraudulently because on the application for citizenship, she had not disclosed that conviction or imprisonment by Israel. And I mean, I did report on this. I was going back and forth from Chicago to Detroit to attend hearings and attend the trial and so on while that was happening around 2013, 2014. It's hard for me to believe it's all that long ago now. And basically, there was a trial, and then there was an appeal, and then there was, then there was a deal, basically, in which she did forfeit her citizenship and was deported to Jordan. She lost her citizenship. So, is that a precedent? Yes and no. That was not a common case, but it was a precedent in the sense that they may well start digging into the backgrounds of naturalized citizens they want to target and looking for things in their files and saying, oh, you didn't disclose this, you didn't disclose that. And actually, there is a hint of that with Mahmoud Khalil, because after his initial arrest and the claims that, oh, he was supporting Hamas and the government being able to produce no evidence for this whatsoever, even mainstream media asking, well, what did he do? Tell us what he did, other than just, exercise his basic right to free speech. And the White House unable to produce anything. And the government hasn't actually charged him with any crime. Later, the State Department came back and said, oh, he didn't disclose on his on his green card application, on his permanent residency application, he didn't disclose that he had once worked for UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees, and he didn't, or I think it was, I'm not sure if it was UNRWA or another UN agency, but the UN Refugee Agency. And he also didn't disclose that he had worked for the British Foreign Office, of all things, as part of their Syria work. Now, that was an attempt by them to generate this idea that he had hidden something. But of course, that's not how the law works, because the law is that you have to willfully withhold material information. So, they could say, well, you didn't list that you were a member of, I don't know, the debate club when you were in high school.
Right.
Is that material? It has to be material in the sense that, would it have made a difference to the outcome of the application? Would working for a UN agency have made him ineligible for US residency? No. Would working for the British Foreign Office make him ineligible for US residency? No. So these things are irrelevant, but they might try to take this approach. I did talk to a couple of lawyers who are in the immigration field to get their sense of this, and they say, and of course nobody really knows, but they did try this in the first administration. It didn't go very far in terms of attacking naturalized citizens, because with naturalized citizens, you have to go to federal court. Only a federal judge can remove someone's citizenship. And that's a very expensive and difficult process, even for the government, and the courts would be clogged. And they only managed to do it in a few dozen cases, which weren't Palestine related, but which were cases of individuals where they were where after naturalization, they were convicted of a crime that was committed before naturalization. And then the government could say, well, you committed this crime before you were naturalized and you didn't tell us about it, therefore your application was invalid. So it gets a bit complex. Without going into that level of detail, it would be hard for them. But on the other hand, this is an administration where the president thinks that by executive order, he can cancel the constitutional right to citizenship at birth, so-called birthright citizenship. So they may try it, but it may go through the courts and take years and years and years. And in the meantime, people's lives are upended and ruined. And that may be enough for them. So anything is possible.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to wait and see how that goes. I just wanted to quote from Mahmoud Khalil's op-ed in the Columbia Spectator
Very
recently.
powerful article.
So powerful. And he says in it, quote, "To the students who remain apathetic to Colombia's disregard for human life and its willingness to discard student safety, as pressure from the federal government intensifies, know that your neutrality on Palestine will not protect you. When the time comes for the federal government to target other causes, it will be your names that Colombia will offer on a silver platter. It'll be your pleas that fall on deaf ears. It will be your just causes that are stonewalled." And I just think that speaks to the idea of the canary in the coal mine, because it does start with Palestine, because they know that they'll experience not less opposition from below, but in positions of power, people are less willing to put anything on the line for Palestine. He also mentioned something in that op-ed that I thought that really spoke to me as well. And that was that while he sits in a jail cell, an immigration detention, and potentially denied being, meeting his child when his child is born because his wife is 9 months pregnant. The people who did this to him are these pro-Israel activists and organizations full of people who, on their breaks from school, went and fought in a genocide against Gaza. And this is why I wanted to ask you, Ali, to speak to something, which is, I think a lot of people are kind of looking at what's happening with organizations like Canary Mission and Beitar, these like really fascistic organizations, and just like, oh my God, I can't believe pro-Israel, I can't believe the ADL is doing this. But you have long called these groups hate groups, including the ADL, which I think is completely a fair characterization and has been for a long time. These are hate groups wrapping themselves in this, some of them aren't even wrapping themselves in it, but wrapping themselves in the fight against anti-Semitism, this like moral panic, this hysteria that's being promoted right now that is completely fraudulent, when the people who are being attacked are people of color, Arabs, Muslims, non-citizens, are literally being abducted off the streets and put in torture-like conditions in these ICE detentions. While people like Sheryl Sandberg whine, this like billionaire Sheryl Sandberg whines about, will you hide me? And anyways, I'm just curious if you can speak to the fact that we need to look at pro-Israel groups as hate groups. These are hate groups.
They're more than hate groups. They some of them, like Betar is Betar USA, which is the sort of self-described US branch of the Betar movement, which is a really violent extremist group that is aligned with the Likud party and goes back a century, and adopted the ideology of Meir Kahane. A lot of Kahanists are involved in that, which is very explicit about the destruction of the Palestinian people through ethnic cleansing and expulsion. They cheer on, like Betar USA, which is a US tax-exempt charity. When our colleague Leila Al-Arian, the journalist, posted, this was in just a few weeks ago, she posted that the first several thousand names. I mean, it was just this shocking number of names in the latest list of Ministry of Health list of Palestinians killed in Gaza is of babies under the age of 1, so aged 0. Like they literally were unsatisfied with thousands of babies being killed, and they wanted more. I mean, it's a level of depravity that is impossible to comprehend. I mean, I can't imagine this level of hatred. As much as Israel has done to the Palestinian people over the last 18 months, let alone the last 80 years, it never occurred to me to want Israeli children to be killed. I don't want that. I never want that. I never want any child to be killed. It's just, you can't relate to it as a human being, this level of hatred. Okay, hate Ali Abunimah because he criticizes Israel. Hate Mahmoud Khalil because he helped organize protests. Hate Rania Khalek because she says resistance is a right. But wanting to murder babies, where does that come from?
Fascism, Nazi feelings, the stripping of one's humanity, which I think is what Zionism and imperialism do. And I just want to say, I think a lot of people are feeling extremely, rightfully, depressed and helpless when they see these images and they see this behavior that you're describing. And feeling upset about that means that Israel has not won, because many of us still have our humanity. We don't want babies to die on anywhere in the world. We don't want babies anywhere in the world to die. And I think that's really important. The fact that we're all still capable of feeling and loving and wanting liberation, and wanting these things to end.
And that's
Because
what makes this so, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Rania,
no,
but it's
please.
what makes it also so unbearable and agonizing, because I think for most of us, we just can't comprehend how anyone can be in a position of power and not do everything they can to stop this. If you're a head of government, if you're the head even of a small country, you could apply the principle first do no harm. I mean, you could say, well, I'm not going to lead an international armada to liberate Palestine from Israel, but the least I can do is stop my own country's complicity, stop my own country's trade, stop my own country's shilling for Israel in international forums. If you're a university president, you could take a position. You could defend your students, even if you disagree with them. And all these university presidents, they always stress how much they disagree with their anti-genocide students. But they could say, we're not going to allow ICE to raid our campuses and to victimize our students, and we're all going to stand together and we're going to defend them. And we are going to use our vast resources to help pay for legal defense. And we're going to hold a rally where I, the university president, invite everyone to rally on the campus to show unity and show support. They're not doing any of that. And it's like, I can't understand how people in power, I mean, the UN Secretary General, who continues to behave in an utterly disgraceful way. We talked about that with Craig Mukhaiber on the Electronic Intifada live stream a few weeks ago, and I know you've had him on. It's like Antonio Guterres is like 80 years old. He's probably not going to run for another term. He is going to have a very nice pension coming out of the UN. I doubt he's going to go hungry or skip a single meal. Why can't he speak truth to power? What's he afraid of?
That's a good question.
What career ahead of him is he jeopardizing? I mean, it makes no sense to me that people in power, unless it's simply the rule that to achieve any level of real power, you have to be a total sociopath. Maybe that's it. Maybe by the time people reach these positions, they've already lost any human feeling. But I think for the most of us, we look at this and, it's incomprehensible.
It really is incomprehensible. And to just speak to the cowardice that you're talking about, I mean, we understand who's complicit, like actually complicit and enthusiastically supporting this, continuing the weapons flow to Israel, giving them the diplomatic and backing and cover that they need, which is the US and the other Western countries. But, it's really shaken my understanding of the world in many ways, because what I also see is while everyone is, there's all these like different poles of power now, is no one's willing to stop their trade deals with Israel. Like, countries that have to deal with US aggression, I get that. I get being scared of the US, but why do you need to be Israel's third largest trading partner? Why can't you cut a trade deal? What's the point of having different poles of power in the world if in the midst of a Holocaust, you do nothing with it, even the most minimal? And it's incredibly frustrating to recognize that we live in a cowardly world that will not be looked at kindly in history, just like Antonio Guterres will not be looked at kindly. Neither will a lot of these major countries that aren't in the US sphere of influence, but are doing absolutely nothing. And I mean, in the case of Russia, come on, like maintaining your relationship with Israel because you actually like the Israelis, I think, in many ways. But all that's to say, I mean, I think, geopolitically speaking, this is the difference maybe between today and an era like World War II, is the biggest powers in the world are all supporting the Nazis, and there's nobody fighting them. And anybody who has stood up to fight them, Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, some various Iraqi groups have basically, in many of those cases been defanged, been surrounded, been put in a position where they actually can't do anything anymore. Or in the case of Yemen, have kind of they've done everything they can. I mean, what more can Yemen do, right? So, and that's another thing I wanted to ask you about here, Ali. I know I'm rambling at length, but a lot of people make a point, and it's a fair point. It's first and foremost, why aren't the Arab countries doing anything? And you're absolutely right. Why aren't the Arab countries doing anything? You have the Emirates, who have normalized with Israel, who are basically Zionist. You have the Saudis, which play this game. The only reason they haven't normalized is because their population would be upset if they did, and they don't want to deal with that. You have this new regime in Syria that is like unwilling to protect even their own people from Israel and is ready to normalize tomorrow if Israel will normalize. The Jordanians, the Egyptians. But I just want to emphasize that while these sort of comprador class of rulers have absolutely sold out the region, there was resistance in the region for decades and decades and decades. And very patiently, one by one, imperialism destroyed every part of that ability to resist, from one country to the next, destroying, collapsing states, killing people, empowering fascists to, stamp out leftist movements and resistance movements, and on and on and on. So much bloodshed in this region. This is not an excuse. It's just to say the Middle East has suffered pretty intensely for all of its attempts at resistance, and it's put in a situation where, there's only so much people can do. There's only so much people can do. I'm just curious your thoughts. I just said a lot.
No, it does look bleak from many angles, but on the other hand, if we look at the big picture here, what has happened since October 7th was a real historic event. In other words, the existing order, where it looked like Israel had succeeded in imposing its will, that the Palestinians had been sidelined, the normalization train was picking up speed again. We had Jake Sullivan, Joe Biden's national security advisor, saying that the Middle East has never been more stable, or words to that effect. And this was just before October 7th. And October 7th showed a number of things. One is that resistance is still there, it's still viable, that even after 18 months, yes, Israel can kill, Israel can destroy, Israel can commit genocide, but Israel hasn't been able to impose its will. Israel is not looking like a good bet. Yes, they still have a huge amount of firepower, but politically, as a project, Israel is in deep crisis, internally, externally. It still has support from the US, of course, and from Europe, but those are also waning powers. And all the regimes that are surrounding Israel, the Arab regimes, the comprador class, the vassals of the US, are not, what this has also shown, what Trump has shown, is that being the best boy in the class doesn't save you.
No.
I mean, Jordan and Egypt are two countries, the first countries to sign peace treaties with Israel, completely in the US camp in terms of their relationships, their reliance on the US militarily, and so on. And Trump was willing to target them and to say, you're going to take Palestinians expelled from Gaza, or we would, maybe cut off the aid. So it's also showing that you can never rely on the US. Who has the US ever saved of its vassals and allies? Did it save the president of South Vietnam and his regime? No. Did it save the regime it installed in Afghanistan? No, that regime collapsed and the Americans left. Did it save Mubarak, who was a US vassal for decades? No. Did it save, the Shah of Iran, for example? So I think that things don't look, in the moment you can say Israel appears all powerful, but there is a deep crisis there. And there's a crisis of confidence in the Zionist project for the reasons you pointed out. Its loss of support, even among a large number, particularly among young American Jews, the US being the main repository of support, even among American Christians, who are actually Christian Zionists far outnumber Jewish Zionists in the United States. It always surprises me to see younger, avowedly Christian voices, even some voices on the right, saying we can't have anything to, we're done with Israel when we see what's going on. And I think that, and there's a massive brain drain from Israel, capital flight, flight of Israeli capital, not just foreign capital. These numbers I was looking at recently, that the amount of Israeli reserves, in other words, say Israeli pension funds, like if you're an Israeli and you have a pension, you invest it somewhere, those funds are now record numbers being held outside the country. So something like $770 billion in Israeli assets are now transferred abroad. So there is, this is, in a sense, a major battle. What we're seeing is major battles in really the decisive war for the future of the region, the war of liberation of the region from um, U.S. imperialism and Zionism. But that's not a battle, as Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah said in one of his last speeches. This is not the final battle.
No, it's just one in many.
It's one in many, and it's a big one. And you have to weigh what the resistance forces were able to do to Israel and to the US. Remember, the US had to send, Joe Biden had to send aircraft carrier groups and every US asset to stave off the Iranian retaliatory missile operations targeting Israel's military and intelligence establishment on October 1st. And they still weren't able to stop it. And that wasn't even everything Iran could have launched if they wanted to do a bigger attack. So US weakness is revealed. Yes, the US and Israel can murder any number of babies, any number of Yemeni tribal members, any number of doctors, any number of journalists. They can do that. But that's not the same thing as being able to maintain their strategic hold indefinitely on the region. It's slipping, and it's a very violent imperial collapse.
Well, I think every imperial collapse is pretty violent. Ali, I know that we have to wrap up because you need to get going, but I just wanted to say a couple things and maybe get your reaction before we go, because we are media people at the end of the day. And I always say this, and I'm going to say it to you as well. I always credit you with teaching me so much about how to do media, how to be a journalist, and how to go up against these people who just lie all the time. And I hope that's okay that I credit you with that. And I hope I'm doing a good job of representing all the things that I have learned from you. But all that's to say, I mean, you have done an incredible job of exposing all of the lies of October 7th, including those media lies, which continue today. I mean, the media at some point needs to be prosecuted. The mainstream media needs to be prosecuted for its complicity in genocide. I mean, there's until now, a year and a half after this, the headlines are still covering up for Israel's atrocity after atrocity after atrocity. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity before we go here to plug your latest on that media complicity, particularly in that mass rape hoax, which people I know can go read at the Electronic Intifada.
Thanks for your kind words, Rania. I learn a great deal from you. You are a very courageous, independent journalist. I think in the last few years, you've really shown us what courage looks like in terms of standing up for your views, for your work, standing by your own work in the face of really vicious, nasty attacks. And that's really been an example for us. Yes, we did a story last week. I don't know if we can, if you're able to put it up on screen, but that's okay if you can't. It's right on the front page of the Electronic Intifada right now. And basically, we a year ago we told people that this guy called Rami Davidian, who claims to have witnessed the October 7th rape crime scenes where dozens of Israeli women were allegedly raped and murdered, and who claims to have personally rescued hundreds of people on October 7th, made it all up. We said that a year ago. And just in the last few days, actually on Friday, Raviv Drucker, a major mainstream Israeli journalist, said the same thing, that his program for Channel 13 called The Source had done a big investigative report on this man, Rami Davidian, and concluded that his stories were fabricated from beginning to end. And Channel 13 suppressed that report, and that's why Raviv Drucker went public and said, we did this report, we stand by it, but we're not being allowed to broadcast it because it's simply too damaging to Israel's whole narrative that every single aspect of its October 7th propaganda has fallen apart. So I wrote up this story, key 7 October mass rapes witness denounced as liar by Israeli reporter, which gets into it. And we'll likely talk about this more on the Electronic Intifada live stream in its regular Thursday spot, which people can find on the Electronic Intifada YouTube channel and other social media every Thursday at noon Eastern time. Is when we go live, and I'm sure we'll be talking about this next week. And check out this story as well as all the other incredible stories we're publishing at electronicintifada.net, especially the many features and articles being written by our colleagues in Gaza, still writing, still reporting, even as they and their families try to survive this genocide.
Well, Ali, I want to thank you for all of the work you and your colleagues at the Electronic Intifada are doing. It's so unbelievably valuable, and I love the live stream. Everybody who isn't, if you're living under a rock, you haven't seen it, but definitely go check out the Electronic Intifada YouTube page. So much important analysis and journalism taking place there. Ali, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rania.